Have you noticed this? You work harder than your parents did at your age. You're more educated, more productive. You followed every rule you were given. And somehow, you're more exhausted, less secure, and falling further behind. Here's the data. Since 1979, worker productivity increased by 64.6%. Wages increased by 17.5%. You're producing 8 times more value than you're being paid for. That's not a feeling. That's Bureau of Labor Statistics data covering 75 years. And here's what nobody tells you. That gap has a dollar amount. $27,800 per worker per year. That's the value you create that you don't capture. Where did it go? To capital, to shareholders, to executives. This video isn't about complaining. It's about showing you the mechanism, why 4 out of 5 workers report burnout, why working harder produces less security than it did for the previous generation, and why the self-help industry, worth $45.72 billion, profits from selling you individual solutions to structural problems. This isn't personal failure, it's system design. And once you see the design, you can't unsee it. Here's what this looks like in practice. A 28-year-old has a bachelor's degree and $35,000 in student debt, works full-time, earning $50,000 a year, more than many parents earned at the same age adjusted for inflation. Rent, $1,667 per month. Student loans, $350. After rent, loans, utilities, groceries, transportation, less than $500 left each month. Saving for a house down payment, $83,000 for 20% down, would take nearly 14 years. Meanwhile, rent payments over those 14 years, $280,000, building zero equity. So, they work a side hustle, 60 hours a week now, exhausted, and the gap between effort and security keeps widening. Or consider a couple, both 35, combined income $110,000, well above median. They want to buy a house. Average home in their area, $414,000. Down payment needed, $83,000. At their savings rate, that's 9 years, but they're paying $2,400 monthly in rent, $28,800 a year going to someone else's equity, not theirs. Their parents bought homes for 3 times annual income in the 1990s, now sitting on $400,000 in equity. The couple earns more than their parents did, adjusted for inflation, but the housing market moved faster than wages. So what changed? Why does working harder produce less security? The answer is structural, and it has a name. Before we go further, burnout is not depression. This distinction matters enormously. Depression is a clinical mental health condition affecting all life areas: work, relationships, leisure, self-concept. Pervasive, often without clear external cause, requiring treatment regardless of circumstances. The DSM defines it as at least 5 symptoms: depressed mood, loss of interest, fatigue, worthlessness, suicidal thoughts, for at least 2 weeks, affecting all functioning domains. Burnout is different. Burnout is work-specific exhaustion with identifiable contextual causes. The World Health Organization recognizes it as an occupational phenomenon with 3 dimensions: exhaustion, feeling drained, emotionally depleted; cynicism, negative attitudes specifically toward work; reduced efficacy, feeling incompetent in your job. Critically, burnout often improves when stressors are removed. If you're depressed, the problem is in your brain chemistry. If you're burned out, the problem is in your working conditions. Why does this matter? Because calling worker exhaustion depression is a political choice. It pathologizes a rational response to an irrational system. If you're depressed, the solution is therapy and medication, individual interventions. If you're burned out, the solution is systemic reform, changing the conditions producing exhaustion. When 4 out of 5 workers report the same problem, that's not a mental health epidemic. That's a structural problem producing a predictable response. You were raised under a specific promise, meritocracy. Work hard, get educated, and success follows. Rewards distributed based on merit, skill, effort, talent, not inherited advantages. Student loans were investing in your future. Unpaid internships were building your resume. The promise, follow the path, and security is guaranteed. The problem is that meritocracy was always myth. Research shows a gap between formal equality of opportunity, legal access to education and jobs, and fair equality of opportunity, actual ability to compete given resource constraints. You have formal equality. You don't have fair equality. Economic mobility is declining. Today's workers are the first generation in modern U.S. history likely to be worse off than their parents in relative terms. Previous generations, 62% home ownership at age 30. Today's 35-year-olds, 49%. The meritocracy promise was work hard enough and you'll succeed. The reality is work hard and you might survive. Let me show you what this looks like. Sarah, 32, works in public health. Master's degree, 2 unpaid internships, honors student. She remembers the exact moment she realized the math didn't work. It was 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. Kitchen table, spreadsheet open, second cup of coffee gone cold. $52,000 salary, $420 in student loans, $1,700 in rent. She calculated, at this rate, saving for a house down payment would take 15 years. 15 years of 50-hour weeks. 15 years of investing in herself. She did everything the system promised would lead to security. The numbers stopped adding up. That spreadsheet moment isn't personal failure. That's the structural mechanism we're about to examine. Here's the structural mechanism that broke the meritocracy promise. From 1948 to 1979, worker productivity and wages grew together. When workers produced more value per hour, they earned proportionally more. That relationship broke in 1979. Since then, productivity has grown 8 times faster than typical worker pay. From 1973 to 2024, GDP per worker hour grew by $28,000 in 2023 dollars, from $45,000 to $73,000. Real median weekly earnings rose by only $200. That's a $27,800 annual shortfall per worker. $27,800 in value that you create but don't capture. Where did it go? To capital, to shareholders, to executives. This is Bureau of Labor Statistics data covering 75 years. 4 mechanisms. First, labor's share of income declined from 64% in 1973 to 57% in 2023, roughly 40% of the gap. Second, market concentration increased. Industries with higher concentration show slower wage pass-through, accounting for 20 to 25% of the gap. Third, union decline eroded bargaining power. Fourth, automation reduced worker leverage. Productivity gains accrue to capital owners, not workers. When your company experiences a 10% productivity increase, you get roughly a 3% raise. Shareholders get the other 7%. You are working harder than your parents. Productivity data proves it. You're producing dramatically more value per hour, but you're capturing far less of it. The effort-reward relationship is structurally disconnected, and when effort doesn't produce proportional reward, human bodies respond with exhaustion. That's not weakness, that's biology. Let me show you what this looks like. Marcus, 29, logistics coordinator. His company implemented new software last year. Team productivity increased 18%. He now processes 340 shipments per day, up from 280. He remembers his manager's email. "Great work hitting the new targets. You're really maximizing the system." His raise? 2.5%. Company profit margin increased 12%. CEO bonus? 22%. Marcus works harder, produces more value, captures almost none of it. He's exhausted, and until last week, he thought it was his fault. Final concept: precarity. Precarious employment is work characterized by instability, lack of benefits, income volatility, limited protections. The gig economy, Uber, DoorDash, TaskRabbit, freelance platforms, normalizes precarity as flexibility. But precarity extends beyond gig work. Today's workers are more likely to experience contract employment, low-paid service jobs, and job instability compared to previous generations at the same age. No job security, instant termination. No benefits, no health insurance, retirement, paid leave. Income volatility, earnings fluctuate weekly. Constant need to seek new work. Algorithmic management, opaque metrics, surveillance. The flexibility marketed by platforms often means 24/7 availability expectations. Research shows precarious employment creates financial instability, social exclusion, and psychological distress through constant uncertainty. You can't plan, you can't save, you can't rest. And this is framed as entrepreneurship rather than structural risk shifting from employers to workers. Here's how these concepts create the burnout economy. The meritocracy myth tells you effort produces reward. Wage productivity decoupling ensures effort doesn't produce proportional reward. Precarity ensures you can never rest because security is always temporary. And when you exhaust yourself trying to overcome structural barriers through individual effort, the system calls it depression rather than rational response to wage theft. That's the mechanism. Now the evidence. What does research show? All sources are listed with full details in the description. Before the data, one more example. James and Lisa, both 36, combined income $108,000, well above median, saving for 8 years. They finally have $75,000 for a down payment, but the homes they could afford 8 years ago now cost 35% more. Lisa described it like this: We've been running as fast as we can. The finish line keeps moving faster. Their down payment, saved through years of sacrifice, now buys less house than when they started. The treadmill moved faster than they could run. This is structural. The Economic Policy Institute tracks productivity and wages using Bureau of Labor Statistics data going back 75 years. Since 1979, productivity grew 8 times faster than typical worker pay. Net productivity up 64.6%. Hourly pay for typical workers up 17.5%. This is government data. The gap between rising productivity and stagnating pay shows workers no longer benefit from their increased output. Before 1979, these grew together. After 1979, they diverged. From 1973 to 2024, average worker output increased by $28,000 per year. Actual wages increased by $200. That's a $27,800 annual shortfall, value created by labor but captured by capital. About 40% through declining labor's share of income, another 20 to 25% through monopoly consolidation. When your company achieves a 10% productivity gain, you receive a 3% wage increase. The other 7% goes to shareholders. Limitation: these are median effects. Variation exists by industry and skill level, but the pattern is consistent. Gallup's 2025 State of the Global Workplace report: 76% of employees experience burnout at least sometimes. A 2025 workplace stress study found 48% of workers report feeling burned out currently. And separate research documents that 84% of workers in their 20s, 30s, and early 40s report experiencing burnout, compared to 49% of workers over 55. When 4 out of 5 people report the same problem, that's not personal failure, that's system design. Limitation: survey data, self-reported, doesn't establish causality, but prevalence is undeniable. These conditions affect workers broadly, but younger workers experience burnout more intensely and with fewer resources to buffer against it. Deloitte's 2025 survey of 23,000 workers globally, 46% don't feel financially secure. Despite workers in their late 30s having median household incomes 18% higher than their parents' generation at the same age. What's happening? Relative deprivation. Their parents experienced a 27% income increase over the previous generation. Today's workers are gaining ground at half that rate. The gap between expectation, "I'll do better than my parents," and reality, "I'm improving more slowly," drives psychological distress. 2025 housing data. Median U.S. home costs $414,400. According to bank rates analysis, to afford the typical home, you need to earn approximately $116,986 annually. That's 49.5% higher than what was required just 5 years earlier. The National Low-Income Housing Coalition's Out of Reach 2025 report: to rent a modest 2-bedroom apartment, you need $33.63 per hour, $69,950 per year. Median wage for home health aides, $15 per hour. Food service workers, $14. Administrative assistants, $21. The math doesn't work. Housing prices have outpaced wage growth by a factor of 2 compared to previous generations. Only 49% of 35-year-olds own homes today versus 62% previously. That 13 percentage point gap represents millions locked out of the primary wealth-building mechanism. Federal student loan data. Average borrower with debt carries $33,000. That's the cost of following the prescribed path. Go to college so you can get a good job. For many, that good job barely covers the loan payment of $350 monthly. Total federal student debt, $1.67 trillion, triple what it was in 2007. And 52% of federal borrowers are over age 35, workers carrying debt into their 40s and 50s. This wasn't individual decision failure. This was structural requirement in a credentialist economy. 3 additional patterns. First, wealth inequality within the same generation is vast and increasing, according to Cambridge research. Wealthy workers with stable employment accumulate more wealth than previous counterparts, but working-class workers are dramatically worse off. Only 42% home ownership versus 63% previously. Class matters more than generation. Second, the self-help industry is worth $45.72 billion globally. $45.72 billion selling solutions to problems that benefit from you continuing to have them. Dr. Jesse Gold, Washington University, says, "The narrative makes burnout seem like a personal failing rather than a corporate responsibility." Third, precarious employment research shows gig economy creates financial instability and psychological distress through income volatility and constant uncertainty. Here's where it gets complex. Federal Reserve data shows workers in their late 30s do have median incomes 18% higher than previous generations at the same age. Some wealthy individuals are thriving. So all workers are suffering is false. The accurate claim, workers face structural conditions producing exhaustion at population level, but class variation is enormous. Wealthy workers are fine. Working class workers are dramatically worse off. The median obscures this distribution. Additionally, burnout affects all age groups, not just younger workers. But younger workers experience it earlier and at higher rates. It's a difference of degree and timing, not kind. Strong evidence for mechanisms, meritocracy myth, wage productivity decoupling, precarity, producing burnout systematically. Overwhelming evidence that burnout is real, prevalent, and occurs earlier than in previous generations. Genuine uncertainty about long-term effects, causal precision, and which interventions work best. Clear evidence that class matters more than generation, that complexity matters. You now understand the mechanism. Wage theft, housing inflation, debt traps, structural precarity. Your exhaustion isn't personal failure, it's accurate perception of systemic extraction. But research can't capture how this manifests in your specific life. Your industry, debt level, family situation, geographic location, these shape how the burnout economy affects you personally. If you've experienced these mechanisms, wage productivity disconnect, the housing trap, precarity masquerading as flexibility, describe how they manifest in your situation. Not to fix you, not for solutions, but because your specific experience adds texture to structural understanding. The research shows population patterns. Your comment shows how those patterns feel from inside them. When one person names a mechanism they've experienced, others recognize it too. That shared recognition is the first step from "I'm failing" to the system is designed this way. And if you find value in structural analysis, rigorous, data-driven, naming systemic problems without false hope, subscribe. Comments are open. We started with a question. You work harder, you're more educated, you followed the rules. So why are you exhausted and falling behind? Now you have the answer. Since 1979, productivity grew 8 times faster than wages. You're producing $27,800 more value per year than you're paid. Housing costs doubled relative to wages. Student debt tripled. Precarity became flexibility. And when you exhaust yourself trying to overcome structural barriers through individual effort, a $45.72 billion industry sells you the story that you're not optimizing correctly. Your burnout is rational. When chronic effort produces insufficient reward, bodies respond with exhaustion, cynicism, reduced efficacy. That's not depression, that's burnout. The distinction matters. If it's depression, the solution is individual therapy. If it's burnout, the solution is systemic reform. Labor law, housing regulation, debt forgiveness, antitrust enforcement, wage, productivity, recoupling. We've fixed structural problems before. The New Deal raised wages, built housing, strengthened unions. We can do it again, but only through collective action, not individual optimization. If you're exhausted, you're not weak, you're not failing, you're not broken. You're responding accurately to a system designed to extract maximum value while providing minimum security. Individual solutions, therapy, boundaries, quiet quitting, help you survive. They provide relief. Use them. But don't mistake survival strategies for cures. The cure is collective. Labor organizing, tenant unions, political mobilization. You can't willpower your way out of wage theft, but organized workers have won wage increases. Organized tenants have won rent control. Organized voters have won policy changes. And this isn't young versus old. Working-class people across generations face the same extraction: retirement insecurity, healthcare costs, wage theft. The real division is class, wealthy versus working class, across all ages. Generational framing obscures the solidarity we need. The system tells you burnout is your failure. The data tells you burnout is its design. Believing the data instead of the system is the first step. What you do with that belief, organizing or just surviving another day, that's up to you. Both are valid. But now you know, you're not the problem. The economy is the problem, and you've named it.